Welcome back to this Thursday's Book Nook. As part of my favorite things, we're reading Tuesdays with Morrie, one of my very favorite books. I hope that you're enjoying it, and let's jump right in. We are on page 41, Taking Attendance. I flew to London for a few weeks later. I was covering Wimbledon. Remember, he's a sports writer. The world's premier tennis competition, and one of the few events I get to go where the crowd never boos and no one is drunk in the parking lot. England was warm and cloudy, and each morning I walked the tree-lined streets near the tennis courts, passing teenagers queued up for leftover tickets and vendors selling strawberries and cream. Outside the gate was a newsstand that sold a half-dozen colorful British tabloids featuring photos of topless women, paparazzi pictures of the royal family, horoscopes, sports, lottery contests, and a wee bit of actual news. Their top headline of the day was written on a small chalkboard that leaned against the latest stack of papers, and usually read something like, "Diana in row with Charles," or "Gaza to team, give me millions." People scooped up these tabloids, devoured their gossip, and on previous trips to England, I'd always done the same. But now, for some reason, I found myself thinking about Morrie whenever I read anything silly or mindless. I kept picturing him there in the house with the Japanese maple and the hardwood floors, counting his breath, squeezing out every moment with his loved ones, while I spent so many hours on things that meant absolutely nothing to me personally. Movie stars, supermodels, the latest noise out of Princess Di or Madonna or John F. Kennedy Jr. In a strange way, I envied the quality of Morrie's time, even as I lamented its diminishing supply. Why did we bother with all the distractions we did? Back home, the O.J. Simpson trial was in full swing, and there were people who surrendered their entire lunch hours watching it, then taped the rest so they could watch more at night. They didn't know O.J. Simpson. They didn't know anyone involved in the case, yet they gave up days and weeks of their lives addicted to someone else's drama. I remembered what Morrie said during our visit. The culture we have does not make people feel good about themselves. And you have to be strong enough to say, if the culture doesn't work, don't buy it. Morrie, true to these words, had developed his own culture long before he got sick. Discussion groups, walks with friends, dancing to his music in the Harvard Square Church. He started a project called Greenhouse, where poor people could receive mental health services. He read books to find new ideas for his classes, visited with colleagues, kept up with old students, wrote letters to distant friends. He took more time eating and looking at nature and wasted no time in front of TV sitcoms or movies of the week. He had created a cocoon of human activities, conversation, interaction, affection, and it filled his life like an overflowing soup bowl. I had also developed my own culture, work. I did 4 or 5 media jobs in England, juggling them like a clown. I spent 8 hours a day on a computer, feeding my stories back to the States. Then I did TV pieces, traveling with a crew throughout parts of London. I also phoned in radio reports every morning and afternoon. This was not an abnormal load. Over the years, I had taken labor as my companion and had moved everything else to the side. In Wimbledon, I ate meals at my little wooden work cubicle and thought nothing of it. On one particularly crazy day, a crush of reporters had tried to chase down Andre Agassi and his famous girlfriend, Brooke Shields, and I'd gotten knocked over by a British photographer who barely muttered sorry before sweeping past. His huge metal lenses strapped around his neck, I thought of something else Morrie had told me. So many people walk around with a meaningless life. They seem half asleep, even when they're busy doing things they think are important. This is because they're chasing the wrong things. The way you get meaning into your life is to devote yourself to loving others. Devote yourself to your community around you and devote yourself to creating something that gives you purpose and meaning. I want to repeat that one. So many people walk around with a meaningless life. They seem half asleep, even when they're busy doing things they think are important. This is because they're chasing the wrong things. The way you get meaning into your life is to devote yourself to loving others. Devote yourself to your community around you and devote yourself to creating something that gives you purpose and meaning. I knew he was right. Isn't that so beautiful? I agree 100% with that, by the way. Not that I did anything about it. At the end of the tournament and the countless cups of coffee I drank to get through it, I closed my computer, cleaned out my cubicle, and went back to the apartment to pack. It was late. The TV was nothing but fuzz. I flew to Detroit, arrived late in the afternoon, dragged myself home, and went to sleep. I awoke to a jolting piece of news. The unions at my newspaper had gone on strike. The place was shut down. There were picketers at the front entrance and marchers chanting up and down the street. As a member of the union, I had no choice. I was suddenly, and for the first time in my life, out of a job, out of a paycheck, and pitted against my employers. Union leaders called my home and warned me against any contact with my former editors, many of whom were my friends, telling me to hang up if they tried to call and plead their case. We're going to fight until we win, the union leaders swore, sounding like soldiers. I felt confused and depressed. Although the TV and radio work were nice supplements, the newspaper had been my life, my oxygen. When I saw my stories in print each morning, I knew that in at least one way, I was alive. Now it was gone, and the strike continued. The first day, the second day, the third day. There were worried phone calls and rumors that this could go on for months. Even I had known, everything I had known was upside down. There were sporting events each night that I would have gone to and cover. Instead, I stayed home, watched them on TV. I'd grown used to thinking readers somehow needed my column. I was stunned at how easily things went on without me. After a few weeks of this, I picked up the phone and dialed Morrie's number. Connie brought him to the phone. "You're coming to visit me," he said, less a question than a statement. "Well, could I?" "How about Tuesday?" "Tuesday would be good," I said. "Tuesday would be fine." In my sophomore year, I take 2 more of his courses. We go beyond the classroom, meeting now and then just to talk. I've never done this before with an adult who was not a relative, yet I feel comfortable doing it with Morrie, and he seems comfortable making the time. "Where shall we visit today?" he asked cheerily when I enter his office. In the spring, we sit under a tree outside the sociology building, and in the winter, we sit by his desk, me in my gray sweatshirts and Adidas sneakers, Morrie in Rockport shoes and corduroy pants. Each time we talk, he listens to me ramble, then he tries to pass on some sort of life lesson. He warns me that money is not the most important thing, contrary to the popular view on campus. He tells me I need to be fully human. He speaks of the alienation of youth and the need for connectedness with the society around me. Some of these things I understand and some I do not. It makes no difference. The discussions give me an excuse to talk to him, fatherly conversations I cannot have with my own father, who would like me to be a lawyer. Morrie hates lawyers. "What do you want to do when you get out of college?" he asks. "I want to be a musician," I say, "piano player." "Wonderful," he says, "but that's a hard life." "Yeah, a lot of sharks." "Well, that's what I hear." "Still," he says, "if you really want it, then you'll make your dream happen." I want to hug him, to thank him for saying that, but I'm not that open. I only nod instead. I'll bet you play the piano with a lot of pep," he says. I laugh. "Pep?" He laughs back. "Pep? What's the matter? They don't say that anymore?" The first Tuesday, we talk about the world. Connie opened the door and let me in. Morrie was in his wheelchair by the kitchen table, wearing a loose cotton shirt and even looser black sweatpants. They were loose because his legs had atrophied beyond normal clothing size. You could get 2 hands around his thighs and have your fingers touch. Had he been able to stand, he'd have been no more than 5 feet tall, and it'd probably have fit into a 6th grader's jeans. "I got you something," I announced, holding up a brown paper bag. I'd stopped on my way from the airport at a nearby supermarket and purchased some turkey, potato salad, macaroni salad, and bagels. I knew there was plenty of food at the house, but I wanted to contribute something. I was so powerless to help Morrie otherwise, and I remember his fondness for eating. "Ah, so much food," he's saying. "Well, now you have to eat it with me." We sat at the kitchen table surrounded by wicker chairs. This time, without the need to make up 16 years of information, we slid quickly into the familiar waters of our old college dialogue. Morrie asking questions, listening to my replies, stopping like a chef to sprinkle in something I'd forgotten or hadn't realized. He asked about the newspaper strike, and true to form, he couldn't understand why both sides didn't simply communicate with each other and solve their problems. I told him not everyone was as smart as he was. Occasionally, he had to stop to use the bathroom, a process that took some time. Connie would wheel him to the toilet, then lift him from the chair and support him as he urinated into the beaker. Each time he came back, he looked tired. "You remember when I told Ted Koppel that pretty soon someone was going to have to wipe my ass?" he asked. I laughed. You don't forget a moment like that." "Well, I think that day is coming. That one bothers me." "Why?" "Because it's the ultimate sign of dependency. Someone wiping your bottom. But I'm working on it. I'm trying to enjoy the process." "Enjoy it?" "Yeah, after all, I get to be a baby one more time." "Well, that's a unique way of looking at it." "Well, I have to look at life uniquely now. Let's face it, I can't go shopping. I can't take care of the bank account. I can't take out the garbage, but I can sit here with my dwindling days and look at what I think is important in life. I have both the time and the reason to do that." So I said in a reflexively cynical response, "I guess the key to finding the meaning of life is to stop taking out the garbage?" He laughed, and I was relieved that he did. As Connie took the plates away, I noticed a stack of newspapers that had obviously been read before I got there. "You bother keeping up with the news?" I asked. "Well, yes," Morrie said. "Do you think that's strange? Do you think because I'm dying I shouldn't care what happens in this world?" "Maybe." He sighed. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't care. After all, I won't be around to see how it all turns out." "But it's hard to explain, Mitch. Now that I'm suffering, I feel closer to people who suffer than I ever did before. The other night on TV, I saw people in Bosnia running across the street, getting fired upon, killed, innocent victims. I just started to cry. I feel their anguish as if it were my own. I don't know any of these people, but how can I put this? I'm almost drawn to them." His eyes got moist, and I tried to change the subject, but he dabbed his face and waved me off. "I cry all the time now," he said. "Never mind." Amazing, I thought. I worked in the news business. I covered stories where people died. I interviewed grieving family members. I even attended the funerals. I never cried. Morrie, for the suffering of people half a world away, was weeping. Is this what comes at the end, I wondered? Maybe death is the great equalizer, the one big thing that can finally make strangers shed a tear for one another. Morrie honked loudly into the tissue. "This is okay with you, isn't it? Men crying?" "Sure," I said, too quickly. He grinned. "Ah, Mitch, I'm going to loosen you up. One day I'm going to show you it's okay to cry." Yeah, I said. Yeah, he said. We laughed because he used to do the same thing nearly 20 years earlier, mostly on Tuesdays, in fact. Tuesday had always been our day together. Most of my courses with Morrie were on Tuesdays. He had office hours on Tuesday, and when I wrote my senior thesis, which was pretty much Morrie's suggestion, right from the start, it was on Tuesdays that we sat together by his desk or in the cafeteria or on the steps of Perlman Hall going over the work. So it seemed only fitting that we were back together on a Tuesday, here in the house with the Japanese maple out front. As I ready to go, I mentioned this to Morrie. "We're Tuesday people," he said. "Tuesday people," I repeated. Morrie smiled. "Mitch, you asked about caring for people I don't even know, but can I tell you the thing I'm learning most with this disease?" "What's that?" "The most important thing in life is to learn how to give out love and to let it come in. His voice dropped to a whisper. Let it come in. We think we don't deserve love. We think if we let it in, we'll become too soft. But a wise man named Levin said it right. He said, love is the only rational act. He repeated it carefully, pausing for effect. Love is the only rational act. I nodded like a good student, and he exhaled weakly. I leaned over to give him a hug, and then, although it is not really like me, I kissed him on the cheek. I felt his weakened hands on my arm, the thin stubble of his whiskers brushing my face. So you'll come back next Tuesday, he whispered. He enters the classroom, sits down, doesn't say anything. He looks at us, we look at him. At first there were a few giggles, but Morrie only shrugs, and eventually a deep silence falls, and we begin to notice the smallest sounds. The radiator humming in the corner of the room, the nasal breathing of one of the fat students. Some of us are agitated. When is he going to say something? We squirm, check our watches. A few students look out the window, trying to be above it all. This goes on a good 15 minutes before Morrie finally breaks in with a whisper. What's happening here? He asks. And slowly a discussion begins, as Morrie has wanted all along, about the effect of silence on human relations. Why are we embarrassed by silence? What comfort do we find in all the noise? I'm not bothered by the silence. For all the noise I make with my friends, I'm still not comfortable talking about my feelings in front of others, especially not classmates. I could sit in the quiet for hours if that is what the class demanded. On my way out, Morrie stops me. You didn't say much today, he remarks. I don't know, I just didn't have anything to add. I think you have a lot to add. In fact, Mitch, you remind me of someone I knew who also liked to keep things to himself when he was younger. Who? Me. The second Tuesday, we talk about feeling sorry for ourselves, for yourself. I came back the next Tuesday and for many Tuesdays that followed. I looked forward to these visits more than one would think, considering I was flying 700 miles to sit alongside a dying man. But I seemed to slip into a time warp when I visited Morrie, and I liked myself better when I was there. I no longer rented a cellular phone for the rides from the airport. Let them wait, I told myself, mimicking Morrie. The newspaper situation in Detroit had not improved. In fact, it had grown increasingly insane, with nasty confrontations between picketers and replacement workers, people arrested, beaten, lying in the street in front of the delivery trucks. In light of this, my visits with Morrie felt like a cleansing rinse of human kindness. We talked about life and we talked about love. We talked about one of Morrie's favorite subjects, compassion, and why our society had such a shortage of it. Before my third visit, I stopped at a market called Bread and Circus. I'd seen their bags in Morrie's house and figured he must like the food there, and I loaded up with plastic containers from their fresh food takeaway. Things like vermicelli with vegetables and carrot soup and baklava. When I entered Morrie's study, I lifted the bags as if I'd just robbed a bank. Food man, I bellowed. Morrie rolled his eyes and smiled. Meanwhile, I looked for signs of the disease's progression. His fingers worked well enough to write with a pencil or hold up his glasses, but he could not lift his arms much higher than his chest. He was spending less and less time in the kitchen or living room and more in his study, where he had a large reclining chair set up with pillows, blankets, and specially cut pieces of foam rubber that held his feet and gave support to his withered legs. He kept a bell near his side, and when his head needed adjusting, or he had to go to the commode, as he referred to it, he would shake the bell, and Connie, Tony, Bertha, or Amy, his small army of home care workers, would come in. It wasn't always easy for him to lift the bell, and he got frustrated when he couldn't make it work. I asked Morrie if he felt sorry for himself. Sometimes in the mornings, he said. That's when I mourn. I feel around my body. I move my fingers and my hands, whatever I can still move. and I mourn what I've lost. I mourn the slow, insidious way in which I'm dying. But then I stop mourning. Just like that. Well, I give myself a good cry if I need it, but then I concentrate on all the good things still in my life, on the people who are coming to see me, on the stories I'm going to hear, on you if it's Tuesday, because we're Tuesday people. I grinned. Tuesday people. Mitch, I don't allow myself any more pity than that. A little each morning, a few tears, and that's all. I thought about all the people I knew who spent many of their waking hours feeling sorry for themselves. How useful it would be to put a daily limit on self-pity. Just a few tearful minutes, then on with the day. And if Morrie could do it with such a horrible disease. It's only horrible if you see it that way, Morrie said. It's horrible to watch my body slowly wilting away to nothing, but it's also wonderful because of all the time I get to say goodbye. He smiled. Not everybody is so lucky. I studied him in his chair, unable to stand, to wash, to pull on his pants. Lucky? Did he really say lucky? During a break, when Morrie had to use the bathroom, I leafed through the Boston newspaper that sat near his chair. There was a story about a small timber town where 2 teenage girls tortured and killed a 73-year-old man who had befriended them, then threw a party in his trailer home and showed off the corpse. There was another story about the upcoming trial of a straight man who killed a gay man after the latter had gone on a TV talk show and said he had a crush on him. I put the paper away. Morrie was rolled back in, smiling as always, and Connie went to lift him from the wheelchair to the recliner. You want me to do that? I asked. There was a momentary silence, and I'm not even sure why I offered, but Morrie looked at Connie and said, Can you show him how to do it? Sure, Connie said. Following her instructions, I leaned over, locked my forearms under Morrie's armpits, and hooked him toward me, as if lifting a large log from underneath. Then I straightened up, hoisting him as I rose. Normally, when you lift someone, you expect their arms to tighten around your grip, but Morrie could not do this. He was mostly dead weight, and I felt his head bounce softly on my shoulder and his body sag against me like a big, damp loaf. Ah, he groaned softly. I gotcha, I said. Holding him like that moved me in a way I cannot describe, except to say I felt the seeds of death inside his shriveling frame. And as I laid him in his chair, adjusting his head on the pillows, I had the coldest realization that our time was running out, and I had to do something. It's my junior year, 1978, when disco and Rocky movies are the cultural rage. We're in an unusual sociology class at Brandeis, something Morrie calls group process. Each week we study the ways in which the students in the group interact with one another, how they respond to anger, jealousy, attention. We are human lab rats. More often than not, someone ends up crying. I refer to it as the touchy-feely course. Morrie says I should be more open-minded. On this day, Morrie says he has an exercise for us to try. We are to stand facing away from our classmates and fall backward, relying on another student to catch us. Most of us are uncomfortable with this, and we cannot let go for more than a few inches before stopping ourselves. We laugh in embarrassment. Finally, one student, a thin, quiet, dark-haired girl whom I notice almost always wears bulky white fisherman sweaters, crosses her arms over her chest, closes her eyes, leans back, and does not flinch, like one of those Lipton tea commercials where the model splashes into the pool. For a moment, I am sure she is going to thump on the floor. At the last instant, her assigned partner grabs her head and shoulders and yanks her up harshly. Whoa! Several students yell. Some clap. Morrie finally smiles. You see, he says to the girl, you closed your eyes. That was the difference. Sometimes you cannot believe what you see. You have to believe what you feel. And if you're ever going to have other people trust you, you must feel that you can trust them too, even when you're in the dark, even when you're falling. That's probably a good place for us to stop there. I kind of want to go back to the very beginning where he was talking about see. Let me see if I can find it. The most important things in life. To learn how to give out love and to let it come in. I think that's a really hard thing. And also at the end of what we read today, of trusting one another. I think we live in a society that we don't dare trust someone else, even though they're probably very trustworthy. But we tend to turn inside ourselves instead of sharing what we're feeling. And that may be what we need to heal, to help our own selves. And in the process, you help others too. I hope that you're enjoying the book. I hope that you're learning something from it. Every time I read it, I'm reminded of very powerful things that we get in the busyness of life and tend to forget those things. But I want to leave you with Morrie's phrase that love wins. Love always wins. Till next time.